Hi, everybody. It's Mike Kerr from The Last Watch, and of course, here the Watchmen. And today, I am super excited about our guest. I have my good friend Nick from Springfield, and he has written a book that just blows my mind. And it's right up everybody's alley in Springfield, coming to the conference August 7th through 9th, the Remnant Rising 2.0, which you can get all the information on at our website, here, thewatchmenmen.com. It has turned out to be the most popular conference we have done in 12 years. I mean, people are signing up for it like crazy now. So it's important that you guys sign up now as well. And you can just go to our website and get all that info. And the reason that he piqued my interest is because he's written a book called Genesis 6 and the Ozarks. And, the Ozarks is a hotbed of information about the Nephilim. Now he runs with some wild people. He's friends with one of our speakers last year that you guys remember, Mondo. He's in with L.A. Marzulli. He knows Derek Gilbert. He's running in the same circles. He's a young guy that we want to lift up. We hope to have him at the conference, but his wife is pregnant with their fourth baby and due right around that time. So we'll see what happens. We'll leave that one up to God for sure. Anybody that would have four kids needs our help. So anyway, uh, Nick, talk to us a little bit about your book. Now, I intentionally didn't say your last name because I didn't want to butcher it. How do you say your last name?
Daigle. So it's like bagel, but with a D.
Well, okay,
Uh,
that's how I would have said it, but I was like, I don't know, man, with the spelling. So anyway, Nick,
I've
go.
I've heard Daigle, D'angle, all of them, so it's
Yeah,
fine.
I'm
I'm used
sure.
to it. I'm used to it.
So
So
anyway, why, what led you down this path? Why did you write this book? Because it's so important and so relevant right now.
so what's real funny, Mike, is if you would have told me 3 years ago that I would have wrote a book, I probably would have said that you're doing drugs or something because that wouldn't have happened. When I was in college, I struggled to write, a couple of page papers. I mean, a couple of page paper. Um, and I've always hated the idea of writing. I never wanted to write at all. Um, but what really piqued my interest is it starts my personal journey about 2.5 years ago. I've always been a man of faith, especially over the past 15 years of my life. I've been very serious about my faith. Um, One thing that I had always struggled with, though, and I'm just going to be honest here, was having that desire to stay consistent in the word. Like I'd I'd try to read, I'd get through it for a few weeks, and the fire would fizzle out. And I'd be like, well, I just don't feel like reading. So I'd go stagnant. Um, and honestly, just on the inside, when you're doing that, you just don't, you feel dead inside, kind of, if you know what I'm saying. Like you don't feel the spirit moving. Um, well, about 2.5 years ago, whenever the Asbury revival happened, I was listening to that message, and it was just a very simple message that I can't do anything to earn my salvation. I can't do anything to earn God's love, but He loves us regardless. And from that love, that's where it spurs on our fruit. That's where it spurs on our passion and our desire and faithfulness to follow Him. And I don't know, just listening to that, something really rekindled rekindled something inside of me. So I'm like, you know what? I claim to follow Jesus. I need to, whether I feel like it or not, truly delve into His Word. Whether I'm feeling excited about it or not, His Word, I don't always feel like working out. I don't always feel like going to work, but you do those things because they are beneficial and they're vital for your life. And it's the same thing with our relationship with God, with prayer, with reading the Bible and all that. So I started to truly delve into the word, and I always stuck around Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those were my comfort zones. And I still love, I mean, it always has, Jesus has to be the focal point in all of this. If he's not, we're missing it all. Like he has to be the bread and butter, the center of everything we do. Um, so I've always stuck around that, but I was like, I'd like to read Genesis. I've never actually ventured through to read it. I've heard some of the stories like the flood and the creation story in Bible school and Sunday school, but I had never really read through it. So I'm reading through Genesis, and God pointed out some pretty powerful stuff to me. Like even with the creation story, how God spoke everything into existence. But when it came to man, he actually took the time to make us and breathe his own breath into our life. And that just, for me, like that just opened my eyes, and it just showed me how much he truly cares about us. That he took a little bit more time to ensure our perfection. He didn't just speak us into existence. He took the time to sit down and mold us and create us. And that just like really blew my mind. Um, so I'm reading through that. I'm reading through the serpent in the garden, all this stuff. Then I get to Genesis 6. And it was right before the flood. There was this little part that we're all familiar with, the sons of God going into the daughters of man and creating the Nephilim. And I'm like, where did this come from? Like it almost it almost seemed out of place. And there's nothing else within that context of those few verses that really allude to anything. So that really piqued my interest, because it's like, in my study notes it said the Nephilim were giants. I'm like, all right, I've heard of David and Goliath, and really Goliath's the only one that I had truly ever heard of from a Sunday school or even just a Sunday service message. And usually when I hear about Goliath, it's like, overcoming the giants in your life. That was probably the most context I'd ever really heard of it, which I do believe that is applicable, but it's so much more than just overcoming giants in our life. Um, so that's where it started me on this path of trying to discover what the Nephilim were. And that's where I came to learn about the Sethite view, where the mainstream view is this, the sons of Seth mating with the daughters of Cain and creating the Nephilim giants. And just logically thinking through it, I'm like, that really doesn't make sense, because Jesus tells us not to be unequally yoked. Well, there are still people to this day that are unequally yoked. You have the wife who's following Jesus, but the husband wants nothing to do with Jesus. They're not creating giant offspring. So that I had a problem with that Sethite view, because it's like, it doesn't make sense. Why would it create giants if you just have someone who's following God who's not following God? So, and that's where I came to discover many of the big names that you mentioned before: L.A. Marzulli, Tom Horn. And Tom Horn, Skywatch TV was probably the majority of the resources that I used to truly learn this new ideology, this new idea, which now I believe is, that is the true story. Um, who else? Alberino was another one that I looked a lot of his content just to kind of get a basis and a foundation on what this meant, what the Genesis 6 narrative was. Um, so yeah, and one thing that really was really pivotal for me was, I don't know if you ever seen the Nephilim, and is it the Nephilim and the Watchers, Angels and Giants? It's a documentary that came out in 2003 or 2004, and it has all these big names, and they talk about, they literally break it down it's very simplified, but it's very, very profound too, in how and I feel like they do a great job in tying it all together, tying the history of, these megalithic structures that are all across America, these mound sites, everything that no one truly knows who created them. What mainstream academia would say is, oh, that was created by the indigenous groups that lived in that area. But when you actually go back and look, those indigenous groups in antiquity would say, no, this was already here when we first came. Machu Picchu was already here. We just came in, and the Inca, they just came in and used what was already there. So it really just opened my eyes to just the reality of what the fallen angels coming down and mating with the daughters of man and creating these hybrid entities, these giants that were almost demigods within the world before the flood. Um, and it also connected dots for me. Like, I mean, you hear in Greek mythology about, once again, Hercules, all these different demigods where these little g gods sleep with the daughters of man and they create demigods. It's like, this gives an answer for where all of these ancient civilizations would have come up with this quote unquote mythos and ideologies. So it after watching that, I will say this was a big pill to swallow because it was something I'd never heard of before. Um, so I kind of put it away for a little bit because I wanted to just digest it all, to really work through it, and to honestly to see if I still to use discernment and see if I truly believe that's if I thought it was true or not. Kind of pray through it and work through it because the thing is like I feel like someone who's following Jesus, we want like we have an innate desire put on us by the Holy Spirit that we want to be led in truth. Like we know his voice, we want to follow him, and we want to make sure we're not led astray. So I wanted to really just sit down and discern, is this true or is this just some hogwash that's being thrown at me? Like I, I wanted to do that. So anyway, what's funny is I then decided, I wanted to watch Ancient Apocalypse. It's on Netflix. It's by Graham Hancock. And funny thing is that documentary was almost like the that's what solidified, no, this is the reality. Because Ancient Apocalypse has nothing to do with the Genesis 6 narrative. It's a secular viewpoint from Graham Hancock on an ancient civilization that at the end of the last ice age, or the younger Dryas, came and gave knowledge to the different groups on how to advance civilization. But then as I'm watching Ancient Apocalypse, I see remnants of the flood myth. I'm not the flood myth, the flood story and Genesis 6 narrative all throughout this secular documentary. And it's like, well, that right there was like, man, even from a secular viewpoint, this points back to the Bible. This is the true, and I can say that 100%. I believe this is the true narrative that the sons of God came down, slept with the daughters of man, creating Nephilim giants to have a seed war and to prevent the coming of the Messiah, to prevent God, to try and thwart God's plan. But as we know, God's always 100 steps ahead of the enemy. So, and it was just interesting because just in Ancient Apocalypse, like some of the lore surrounding, like the Great Pyramid of Kahlua in Mexico, the lore is that there was a a prehistoric flood, and some giants built the pyramid and climbed into the top of the pyramid to survive the flood. It's like, well, you got right there giants building a megalithic structure and a flood. Then you also have Gigantia, which was built by it's a megalithic temple in Europe. It was built by a giantess, a female giant, back in antiquity. And it's like, so it was just funny how every single ancient civilization has a flood myth too. It's like, at what point does 1 + 1 = 2, where you're like, this is the real story? These are just all these different mythologies. They point to the one truth, which is Noah's flood. Um, but I don't know. It was just me watching all that stuff and researching that really put the puzzle pieces together for me to really learn this stuff, digest it, and I mean, almost kind of become a foundation for my faith now too. Um, so where that gets me is, like you said, I'm I'm actually a hospice nurse. I work 40 hours a week. My wife's a teacher. She's about to be a stay-at-home mom next year with our fourth child coming. But I have four little ones. The oldest is not even 10 yet. I don't have, I don't really have the means to be able to, you know, pack up for a week vacation and go to Machu Picchu with the family. Like we're not at that point in our life. I'd love to go. Like I really do. Like when I'm on my bucket list, I'd love to go see Stonehenge. I'd love to go see the pyramids of Giza. I'd even love to go see Golan in Golan Heights, the Gilgal Raphaim, and all these different megalithic sites still across Israel. I wouldn't want to go right now, but um, I want to see a lot of these megalithic sites. Well, like I said, I'm not at that point in my life right now. Even 3 hours away from me in St. Louis, you have Cahokia, which is a massive mound complex that at the height they anticipate there was 20,000 people that lived there, 1,000 years ago in the height of that civilization. Well, it's even hard for me to go to St. Louis for a weekend to even see Cahokia. So it got me on a journey to discover, is there anything local that I can find that would possibly point to Nephilim or something Nephilim in origin within my own backyard? And that's honestly what started my journey. Um, I just I'm very inquisitive. I like exploring, so this was right up my alley. Um, so I don't know if you've heard. I'm sure you've heard of Fritz Zimmerman,
Yep.
correct? So Fritz Zimmerman has that encyclopedia of ancient North American giants, or ancient giants in North America. Well, I love that book, and I have a copy of it right here. But in there, he's pretty much gotten all of, just from the late 1800s to early 1900s, all the accounts of 7 to 11 foot skeletons that have been found in earthen mounds all across America, primarily in the Ohio River Valley, because that's where majority of these mound complexes are at. They are in the Ohio, Indiana, all that area, um, along the Mississippi River. But there was one that I found in there by a Sterling Newberry. It was a Sterling Newberry found a burial mound here in the Springfield area where he found a 7 foot skeleton along with seven other skeletons that were buried with the 7 foot skeleton. And they were found, and it was very interesting in how they were buried, because they were found where one was laying north south, then the next was layered on top. The next skeleton was on top of the one laying north south, laying east west. Well, a bird eye view looking down, they formed the cross. And the interesting thing is, you'd have the group of two, and then later on top of that was another group of two, and another group of two, and another group of two, to where all eight were buried. Four were laying north south, the other four were laying east west, to where it formed the cross. So I'm like that just blew my mind. So I mean, that got me on a journey to want to find where this location was, and that's really where my book goes into explaining my research and finding these things, and really it involves around this Sterling Newberry too. So this was from Sterling Newberry was a Baptist pastor in the 1930s here in Springfield. Well, in Fritz Zimmerman's book, he only had that one article on Newberry, Sterling Newberry finding the 7 foot skeleton. I decided, let me hone in more on this Sterling Newberry and see what else I can find that he found. And he found, and there are several things that he found that I really believe really point to Nephilim being in this area at one point in history. So first, I'll start off with in 1932. This was 2 years before he found the 7 foot skeleton. Sterling Newberry and his son, Sterling Newberry Jr., they were at this place called Fulbright Spring. So Fulbright Spring is a local spring here that I believe it was one of the first springs settled when white settlers came this way, and the Fulbright family homesteaded that place. Um, so it's a very old spring, and even right now, it's still used. It's one of the main water sources for Springfield, actually. and they have a water station there that is probably at least 100 years old, and the city still uses it to filter the water and stuff like that, and to cleanse the water. What's interesting is north of that spring there is a hill, and like I said, in 1932, Sterling Newberry unearthed two burial mounds north of that hill, north of where this Fulbright pumping station is at. Um, in the article, it says the burial mounds were on the west side of the hill, so that way when the setting sun, like, so he alludes to the indigenous people, or I'm sorry, the prehistoric people would have buried these two burial mounds on the west side, so as the sun was setting, it was paying reverence to the setting sun. So right there you might have some kind of sun worship. um in the top so the top burial mound, there was an Indian chieftain that was buried there. And what was interesting about this is the Indian chieftain, his skull was painted red. And then below that, there was another burial. And in that burial mound, Newberry and his son unearthed 7 skeletons. Now, this article doesn't say anything in particular about the size of these skeletons, but the way they were arranged, they were aligned like the spokes on a wheel, which I don't know if you've ever looked through Fritz Zimmerman's book. There are several burial mounds across the Ohio River area where there were spoke mound burials there. And actually, in 1920, there was one that was unearthed in Indiana where there was 8 skeletons aligned like the spokes on a wheel, and one of those skeletons was actually 8 to 9 feet long. So that right there was one key evidence that you had this burial practice that was unearthed in 1920 where there was a spoke mound burial, but then you had the exact same practice here in Springfield at this Fulbright area. Um, sorry, brain fart.
That's
So
all
yeah,
right.
so so you had
Welcome to
this,
my world.
yeah, you had the spoke mound burial, and so I believe that that spoke mound burial was probably most likely some kind of burial practice for sun worship. I mean, I would think the way they were aligned, it would be some kind of form of sun worship. Um, some other interesting stuff about the Fulbright area is a few years prior to Sterling Newberry, there was a gentleman named Williams. No, there was a gentleman named E.M. Shepard. Um, E.M. Shepard was a professor at a local university here, and he found a cave close to where Fulbright is, where there was some pretty strange bones in there, what the article says. And he found several thigh bones that had been broken in half where the bone marrow was extracted out. Well, I don't know if you've ever heard much about Lovelock Cave. Whenever they excavated Lovelock Cave, they also found thigh bones that had and other long bones that had been broken in half where bone marrow was extracted out. For me, that points to some kind of cannibalistic activity. Um, and like I was telling Tony this yesterday. I even think of in Lord of the Rings whenever you have the orc breaks the bone in half and he's guzzling down the bone marrow. Like I imagine that is some kind of cannibalistic activity. And as we know, these giants were cannibals. Um, it says in Joshua that when the 12 spies went into the land, they they seen giants and they were but grasshoppers in their eyes. Um, and it says one funny thing about the land of Canaan. It says that it is a land that devours its inhabitants. Therefore, I truly believe that that is alluding to these giants being cannibalistic in nature. Um, Another interesting thing about the Fulbright area is there is a cave called the Devil Slide Cave that is northeast of where this Indian chieftain would have been buried, um, at the Fulbright area. Well, this Devil Slide Cave supposedly has Viking runes in it. Um, when you align up the mouth of that cave with where that Indian chief was buried, it actually forms the solstice alignment.
Hmm.
Also pointing to an advanced knowledge of the cosmos, advanced knowledge of celestial alignments, which, as we know, the fallen angels, the watchers, would have given that knowledge to their sons to almost, I believe, lord it over man, for man to for that to be kind of a something for them to use for the man to worship them as gods. Like, I have this knowledge of the sun. I know how the sun's going to move. I know where it's going to rise, the path it's going to follow. I am a god. Worship me. So like, I really think that that is one way that these Nephilim giants possibly used in order to oppress and have man follow them in antiquity. Um, so yeah, it's very interesting how that aligned like that. How that cave aligned with the burial mound. Also, Sterling Newberry, so 2 years later, he found that 7-foot skeleton that I was telling you about a little bit ago off of the James River. Um, what's interesting about that is when I looked at the article about that, there was 3 gentlemen who unearthed this 7-foot skeleton. One being this Sterling Newberry, another one being a William Sarton, and the last one being a Denver Break. Um, so I really wanted to find the location of this burial mound. The problem is, when they wrote the article, they wrote it very vague for good intentions too, so people wouldn't go and vandalize the site. But they wrote that this burial mound where the 7-foot skeleton was found was off the James River on a bluff near the Holman Ranch. And the thing is about the James River and what used to be the Holman Ranch was like 2,000 acres. The James River, for anywhere from 7 to 8 miles, follows along what used to be the old borders of the Holman Ranch. So and all along this river, there are bluffs. So it gives you a really long span of land to try and find one single burial mound. And for me, that would almost be impossible. But I decided I needed to go back and look at the 3 gentlemen that I mentioned that were in the article. So you had Sterling Newberry, and I understand why he was there. He was the amateur archaeologist. He would have been, he's kind of in charge of the group, so he needed to be there. The next one was William Sarton. William Sarton was a miner. And just through my research and all, a side note, I actually have become acquaintances with Sterling Newberry, one of his living grandchildren. And he actually told me that Sterling Newberry used to be a miner at one point too. So I'm willing to bet Newberry met Sarton working in the mine fields. So it made sense why he'd have a miner there. The miner, they know how to excavate. Well, this last one was Denver Break, and he was a farmer. And I'm like, why does he need a farmer on his team to unearth this burial mound? And then that's when it clicked. Unless the farmer owned the land. So that got me into the library, looking at old plat maps, looking at old land ship owner maps, genealogical records, the whole 9 yards, to try and find where this land could have been off the James River. I couldn't find anything from plat maps owned by a Denver Break, but I did find a certain stretch of land that was owned by the Break family. So, looking through genealogical records, I was able to find the bluff that it was actually owned by the uncle of Denver Break, and at one point the grandfather of Denver Break. So that's where I'm like, I need to look into this land right here. Like try and get access to this land. Well, what's interesting is through this I met a man named James Clary. James Clary, he's a local, he's a native here to Springfield. He actually owns a he used to own a restaurant here called Clary, so he's a very well-known chef in the area. He doesn't do that anymore, but he actually does. There's a radio station where he does a talk show on there, and I went on and talked about my book. But I found on one of the episodes on his talk show, he actually talked about Sterling Newberry, and he's the only person that I had ever come across that ever heard anything about Sterling Newberry. So I got in touch with the radio station to get in touch with James because I wanted to tell him like like swap information with him. Him and I have become pretty good friends too. So we met up, we swapped information, found out who currently owns the land, and here's where it's a funny thing about God's sovereignty. So the lady that owns the land used to go to church with James. So James had called her to see about gaining access to where we believe this burial mound would have been at. And she had said, if anyone else would have called, I wouldn't have answered. But because I recognized your name on the caller ID, I answered it. So James and I got to go out there and just we did some exploring. And I had gone out there several other times. James and I became friends with a gentleman named Doug, who also he's gone across all of Missouri and has mapped out all kinds of archaeoastronomy sites, mounds, just looking for pretty much the same thing we're looking for, um, proof of an advanced knowledge. Well, he went out there with us one time. And what's interesting is on top of this bluff, you can actually see the old homestead of the Brake family. Well, next to it, they had this berm structure, which I mean, it's like a mound, but it's square, like it's kind of a square rectangular shape, um, and it's all completely covered by woods now and foliage and trees. But Doug noticed something very interesting about this berm structure when we were in it scoping it out. There was actually on the outside of the berm structure, you had what looked like 250 to 300-year-old trees based off of the size of the trunk of the trees. On the inside of this berm structure, the trees were very little smaller, which shows that these trees were newer. So Doug was like, at one point, the inside of this berm would have been completely cleared. Like these trees are only 50 or 60 years old. So it's interesting because he said, this really reminds me of a cemetery. Well, sorry, I know I'm going all over the place, but what what's interesting is, like I had mentioned, Sterling Newberry was a Baptist pastor. Um, he was actually pastor of a church called Shiloh Baptist Cemetery. No, Shiloh Baptist Church. And Shiloh Baptist Church burned down a long time ago, and they have since turned Shiloh Baptist, where what that Shiloh Baptist was, into a cemetery now. Well, the Brake family is now buried at Shiloh Baptist Cemetery. So there is a plaque there where it next to the Brake family burials, where it says that there was an old Brake family cemetery 3 miles from here. Turns out what we were standing in was at one point the old Brake family cemetery.
Hmm.
And what's interesting is the Brake family cemetery, we we really believe that berm structure is something prehistoric. So what I think happened is the Brake family owned this area. They owned this bluff, and as the patriarchs would die off or anybody in the family would die off, they'd bury them inside of this berm structure because that berm structure may have been some kind of prehistoric burial site. And it seems like in a lot of my research, I've come to realize when the white settlers came here, they buried their dead on top of what the Native Americans used. So, I mean, the Native Americans, they would have they buried their loved ones out of floodplains. They buried them on top of ridges and on top of bluffs, so that way when the rivers flood, it wouldn't wash it away. So the white settlers buried just on top of where these Native Americans would have buried. Um, so I really believe the Brake family, they just started burying in what this berm structure was, which was most likely a prehistoric burial site. Um, so here's where I'm going to tie it all together. So here's what I think happened. The Brake family, they're buried in Shiloh Baptist Cemetery. I found a newspaper article that mentions that the Brake family were members of Shiloh Baptist.
Hmm.
So what I think is Newberry was the pastor there. The Brake family used that berm structure as their family burial plot. What if one of them had passed away? They were digging a plot to bury the loved one, and that's where they possibly unearthed this mound, or they unearthed this burial of where the 7-foot skeleton was at. Well, they just stopped digging because they didn't want to bury their loved one where there could have been an existing prehistoric burial. But they knew their pastor, Sterling Newberry, was into archaeology. So they told their pastor about it, and that's when he came with William Sarton, and Denver Brake joined the group, and that's where they unearthed this 7-foot skeleton and these other 7 skeletons, which then created the article I found. Interesting thing too is Newberry. It says in the article that Newberry believed the 7-foot skeleton was a person of significant importance. Had to be some kind of high chief or high priest that was greatly revered, probably even worshipped. And these 7 other skeletons that were buried with him were most likely servants to him that were sacrificed to be buried with him to serve him in the next life. And also, they found in that burial a stone sacrificial bowl that was actually in the arms of the 7-foot skeleton whenever they unearthed him. But yeah, it's been a lot of research.
Man, that's like you've really dug down. No pun intended, but you've really looked into it and you've written this great book. Uh, and I do believe, Nicholas, that you're going to be one of the giants in the Nephilim research world. I mean, you've done a great job. How do people get your book? How do they find you? How do they follow you?
So people can get my book by going to Amazon, and you really just you type in Genesis 6 and the Ozarks, and it should come up. Funny thing is, so Mondo Gonzalez actually wrote the foreword for my book. So when you type in Genesis 6 and the Ozarks, it comes up with me as the writer, but also Mondo Gonzalez, which I thought of that. I was like, that may be a good thing because maybe people might go to research something for Mondo, look up something he's done, and my book pops up. So that might be another marketing strategy that I won't try to look into fixing that one. But
Whatever works.
yeah, exactly. It's not the worst thing to have your book pop up under Mondo Gonzalez. There are worse things in the world. But I mean, and there was just so much more things that Sterling Newberry found. I don't really want to go into all of it. Definitely leave some mystery for the readers. But there's also a cave that was found 2 months after they found the 7-foot skeleton, where there was Aztec style pottery that was found
Hmm.
in this cave. And inside of this cave was also a burial. They found a corpse, and when the air from outside, it was so dry in this cave, when the air from outside hit the skeleton, the skeleton disintegrated. Well, a few months back, I actually went on L.A. Marzulli's show to talk about my book, and he mentioned, and I never heard this before, but he mentioned that the Native Americans didn't bury in caves. That was actually a Nephilim thing.
Hmm.
So,
Interesting stuff. I mean,
yeah.
you got to get the book, you guys. I mean, get busy. Go over to Amazon. It's real simple. You just put the name of the book in and Google it, and it'll come right up. I did it this morning. And I've gotten through most of the book. It's fascinating, and the whole Ozark region is fascinating.
Hmm.
And we'd like to have you guys come out to our conference in August. Again, just go to our website here, thewatchman.com, and check it out. And hopefully we'll get Nick there, God willing. I understand, man. You're a busy guy right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway, that's going to wrap it up for us today, you guys. And I want to thank you again, Nicholas Daigle. I got his name right this time. Nicholas Daigle. Look him up, follow him. He's one of the ones you're going to want to watch as we go forward into wherever it is we're going. God bless each and every one of you, and we'll see you next time up here at The Last Watch.